Rachel standing by with a special guest.
Indeed. Joining us now is the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Mr. Pete Buttigieg. Secretary Buttigieg, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Same here. Good to be with you.
How do you like being Transportation Secretary? How is life in Washington?
I love it. It's an interesting job in any season, but right now, when we're on the cusp of what might be the most transformative thing that's happened to transportation in my lifetime, it's thrilling. Of course, we got a lot of work to do to get from here to there, but I'm thrilled to be working on these issues and really honored to be part of this cabinet. It's just an incredible team.
In terms of those transformative proposals, one of the things that we've noticed in these first 100 days is that you've emerged as one of the administration's most articulate advocates for the president's plans, especially when it comes to somewhat hostile audiences. And so I have to ask if all the conversations you have been having with Republicans and with the folks at Fox News and other entities like that, have they taught you anything about this emerging political reality where Republican voters seem to like what President Biden is proposing and what he's doing, even while Republican members of Congress, Republican senators won't go along with any of it?
Yeah, you're putting your finger on, I think, the defining dynamic of the moment, at least when it comes to domestic policy, which is we have policies that have such extraordinary, strong bipartisan support out among the American people. But just because that's true doesn't mean it's reflected here in Washington. And that's where I'm trying to earn my paycheck, engaging with members on both sides of the aisle, reminding them that this is not one of those moments when we're asking them, as administrations sometimes do, to vote for something that's unpopular and that the American people don't understand or want. This is something that is popular, and it's popular for the very good reason that it's going to create millions of jobs. And as the president will remind Americans tonight, those are jobs that are available to people, whether you've got a college degree or not. The plan revolves around infrastructure, but fundamentally it's a jobs plan. And coupled with the families plan that the president's rolling out tonight, we're asking Congress to support something that the American people have long known we need to do.
Secretary Pete, can we call you Secretary Pete? I'm so used to calling you Mayor Pete that Secretary Pete kind of seems like it works. So there has been some movement in terms of Republicans coming to the White House, having conversations about a smaller infrastructure plan. They want to get rid of human infrastructure and just have it be like bridges and roads and things that are traditional infrastructure. Do you have in your mind both a deadline for when you stop talking and stop negotiating and sort of an amount that you're willing to reduce what is a very ambitious, very large infrastructure plan that the White House has in mind? How far are you willing to reduce it? Because Republicans are talking about, in the 500, billion era. And, obviously the president is much, much higher.
Well, we believe we need to go big. And that means also going big above the baseline of what would have happened anyway, which is really important when you're looking at these different proposals and trying to get an apples to apples comparison. As you know, the president's a big believer in a bipartisan approach. I've been in meeting after meeting where I've been talking to people in both parties in both chambers. We've had Oval Office conversations, good conversations with both parties. I think the president really wants to make sure that we engage in that process, but he's also been clear that doing nothing is not an option, that he wants to see real progress by Memorial Day, which is going to be honest before we know it. And that we have to do something that's really going to rise to meet the moment. So, we welcome the fact that the other side has come to the table with specific proposals. We need to make sure that we have something that's really going to answer the fact that, America's fallen to 13th place in infrastructure, headed in the wrong direction. And we really stand at a crossroads here. Are we or are we not ready to make a future generation proud of what we here in the early 2020s did to make sure that America could thrive going into the rest of this century?
Mr. Secretary, as sort of the designee to what Rachel described as hostile, I'll say, / skeptical audiences, I want to ask you how, first of all, the superpower of this White House seems to be the redefinition of bipartisanship to legislation and policies that are wildly popular among Democratic and Republican Americans, and sort of leaving the Washington equation to fester in whatever way it will. But how important is the messaging around how we're going to pay for really transformative policies in keeping those high levels of bipartisan support in the country among the public?
I think it is important. Again, a little bit different when you're engaging with the members on Capitol Hill, but among the American people, the way we're going to pay for it actually makes it even more popular, because people have known for a long time that having major corporations, sometimes making billions of dollars in profits, paying zero in taxes, doesn't make any sense. I think most people, if you think about it, corporate taxes in this country, they're either too high, they're too low, or they're just right. And I think most Americans agree that they're not just right. And they're not too high when some companies are paying literally nothing at all. Tonight, you'll be hearing about how the family's plan is going to be paid for. And that, again, involves a tax code that rewards work, not wealth. We're not calling for high taxes. We're calling for fair taxes. And that actually reinforces the support that this commands among the American people. And, the president's proposed plans that are paid for. If the other side has different views on how to pay for things, let's have them bring that forward and we can talk about it. But this is about making sure that we collect the revenue we need on a fair basis in a way that's good for the economy and make investments that are even better for the economy, which is why independent forecasters see these steps adding trillions of dollars in value and millions of jobs to the American economy.
Mr. Secretary, I have to say, speaking of transportation, we have been watching taillights on the other side of the screen while we have been talking to you, because we are watching that motorcade stage itself and get ready to head from the White House over to the Capitol, just so our audience knows why we are seeing that. But let me ask you a question about a major portion of the infrastructure proposal, and one that gets always included whenever anybody does even a short list of bullet points about what it's in. One of the things that everybody always makes sure to mention is that there's going to be a big investment in broadband, that we're going to get high-speed broadband to everybody in the country, including rural and underserved areas. And yay, nobody's against that. I live in a part of the country that has had real trouble getting broadband, and I feel like I have been hearing this proposal for a long time. I've been hearing this proposal since almost the days of dial-up internet, and certainly through my experience of satellite internet and all of the other terrible things that don't work if you don't have fiber. Why is it doable now when previous administrations have said they were going to do it, have said they were committing to it, and it just never seems to advance? Why now?
Yeah, everybody's for it. Everybody always says in their campaign they want to do it. What's different this time is a plan that's going to include the money to get it done, the will to get it done. And a lot of it's about funding. Some of it's just about what's going on in terms of the structure of the way we look at telecommunications in this country, and ensuring that we're tearing down any barriers to getting good quality and affordable broadband to every American. But it's not like there's some cosmic barrier making it impossible to do this. It's a set of decisions. It's a set of policies. And the president's proposing the policies that will actually make it happen. And I think it's important that this is not just saying we're going to add broadband or we're going to increase it by a certain percentage. He's saying 100%, and he means it. And by the way, that last couple percent is going to be hard, but he believes in rising to do hard things. And, in a way, it sounds counterintuitive, but I actually think that it's the broadband piece that may be in the finest tradition of American infrastructure. And what I mean by that is all the great moments in big choices and era-defining decisions about infrastructure here, from the Erie Canal through the Transcontinental Railroad to the interstate highway system. Part of that great tradition was actually that each one of those decisions expanded the traditional vision of what infrastructure is. We're living in a time where being connected to the internet is just as important as being connected to the interstate highway system. You need both. And after years and years of talk, the president's laying out a way to actually get it done.
U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Secretary, we really appreciate you being here on this big night. Thank you so much for your time.
Same here. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.